Hey, howdy folks, Drew Man here. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you how to change out an alternator in a C6 Corvette. Alrighty, first off, let's take a look at some of the tools we'll be using during this job. Going to need a couple of wrenches. I have here 13mm and 15mm, and a couple of socket sizes, 15mm here on this ratchet, and then a 10mm on a little extension for disconnecting the battery. And then this tool right here is a belt removal tool with a 15mm socket on it. You can either purchase these for maybe around 30 bucks for a set, or you can probably borrow one from a local auto parts store. That's about it for what we're going to need tool-wise for this job. Alrighty, so first things first, before starting this job, we do want to make sure that the engine bay is cool. Secondly, we want to disconnect the negative lead on the battery. Alright, and then moving forward with the steps, we're going to go ahead and connect this tool right here onto the belt tensioner, and I'm just going to leave it floating there for a second. You might want to put a towel or something here in case that falls, but I'm going to move to the other side of the vehicle, okay? Okay, next thing we're going to do from the driver's side of the vehicle is reach across the engine bay, take a hold of the lever connected to the pulley tensioner, pull it towards us, take hold of the belt right here, lift it up and over the pulley on the alternator, and then slowly release it, being careful not to allow it to smack into the car body. And there we go, it's not touching it. If you want, like I said earlier, put a towel or something there to protect the vehicle. As far as a note on the belts, you want to make sure you know where your belts were before you start taking things off. You might take a picture of it or look at a belt diagram when you're putting everything back together later to make sure that the belt is on the proper path. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and remove this tensioner tool and set it up here for now, out of the way. Next, taking a look at the back of the alternator, we're going to go ahead and remove this electrical connector. There's a little piece you can pull up on. Lift that up. Careful, it may be kind of fragile with age, plastic, but you don't want to pull too hard and break it. And we're just going to set that to the side. Next, if you pull back on this boot, you can see there's a nut back there, right? For mine, it's a 13mm nut. We're going to go ahead and remove that next. Taking that 13mm wrench, just going to go ahead and put it on the end of this and start loosening. And then once you've got it broke loose, you can go ahead and just de-thread it by hand, being careful not to drop that nut. And once we've got it de-threaded, just going to go ahead and set that down. Maybe that's not the safest place to set it up here, and you can just remove this off, okay? And now the alternator is electrically disconnected and the belt is off. Next up, we're going to take our 15mm ratchet and socket, and we're going to remove these two bolts. There's one up top here on the alternator, and the other one is down here. Hopefully you can see that in the video. The one at the bottom is a little bit harder to get to. You might need a little bit of a longer socket to get it started, and then you might switch it out for something a little shorter. I'm going to go ahead and break this top one loose. It's on there nice and tight, okay. And I'm going to go ahead and get that bottom one broken loose. Okay, it's a little bit of a tight fit, but then we're just going to walk them out. And through the magic of video editing, in the next scene, these bolts will be removed. Okay, I've got the bolts all the way loosened up, so we can just go ahead and remove them by hand now. There's the top one, reaching down in there and fishing out the bottom one. Okay, now those bolts are removed. Okay, now that we've got those screws removed, or those bolts removed, gonna go ahead and take this little bitty pry bar looking thing. You can use a flat bladed screwdriver, and I'm just gonna go ahead and put a little pressure on that just to loosen up the alternator. And then I'm gonna take hold of this fuel rail shroud and just give it a slight tug upwards to lift it off its mounts to give us a little more clearance for removing this alternator. I'm gonna reach in with both hands, wiggle it a little bit, and go ahead and fish it on out of there. And there's the alternator removed, and we'll grab the new one. Okay, so next up we're going to take the new alternator, orient it as such. Be careful, this back housing, the plastic housing, is super fragile and they tend to crack. This one actually is cracked in shipping, and we're just going to do the reverse. We're going to fish it down in there, get it placed roughly in place. Okay, now that it's there, if you want to, you can go ahead and replace that shroud, leave it there for now, and take your top bolt, get it wiggled into place, take your bottom bolt, look on down in there. This one can be a little tricky. and you might need 2 hands for it. And once you get those holes lined up, you can go ahead and start hand threading those bolts. And then once you've got them hand threaded, as tight as you can get them with your hands, with your fingers, then you're going to go ahead and switch over to your socket. And it's the 15mm socket once again. Okay, so I've got that top one about as snug as I can get it by hand, working on the bottom one next. Okay, switching over to the ratchet. Gonna make sure you have it tightening. Okay, got the top one a little bit snug, working on the bottom one. Okay, now I've got the longer or taller socket in there to give me a little bit more maneuverability in there so I don't keep whacking into the pulley up here on the alternator as I cinch down on this ratchet. Now you do have some brake lines down there that you got to be careful about whacking into, and then you do have this power steering return line as well, so just be aware that there are somewhat sensitive components nearby. Okay, so now that I've got those bolts on there pretty snug, I'm going to go ahead and torque down on them fairly tightly. I don't know off the top of my head what the book specs are for how tight these suckers need to be, but as a rule, when I'm working on cars, I don't always check the books. Sometimes I just torque it down real tight, and it seems to be good enough for me, but I highly advise you to check your owner's manual to see those specifications on what it's actually supposed to be. Don't just take some DIY internet mechanic's word for it, you know. If it's your vehicle, maybe have it done professionally if you want to get it done, or you can take on those risks and do it yourself. All right, got it cinched down nice and tight. All righty. Okay, the next piece, gonna go ahead and take these electrical connections and plug this top one in. Plop, got that plugged in. Next, I'm going to take that little nut that we removed earlier, put this electrical connection right back on there. Okay, pulling down that boot, placing that 13mm nut right back on there, and I'm going to go ahead and tighten that down now. For this one, I'm not going nearly as tight. That's just holding the wire in place. Okay. Next up, we're going to put that belt back on. So I've reconnected the belt tensioner tool to the pulley. I'm going to go ahead and pull it towards me. Reaching down here, I'm going to take hold of the belt and work it onto the alternator. Alrighty, got it back on the alternator. Going to slowly release this and remove the tool from the engine bay. Well folks, that about wraps it up for this job. All there is left to do is reconnect that battery and then double and triple check your belt diagrams to make sure you got your belt back on there the right way. And that's how you change out an alternator on a C6 Corvette. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to post them in the comment section below and I will get back to you. And yeah, stay safe folks. Thanks for watching.